What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about why Norway is becoming the world's richest country. Now, I know Norway is famous for being wealthy, especially compared to how small Norway is compared to the rest of the world, but I'm still shocked to hear that Norway might be on its way to becoming the richest country in the world. So I want to take a look at this chart real quick, which shows the richest countries in the world. And right now, Norway is in eighth. This is per capita, like wealth per person. Norway has the eighth highest wealth per person of any country in the world, and that's pretty amazing. I didn't know that actually Ireland was up at number one. This is pretty recent data, actually. And Norway is doing better than the United States, actually, which a lot of Americans would be pretty shocked to hear about. So Norway is extremely wealthy per capita, per person, and just wealthy in general for the size of Norway. And Norway is on its way to being the wealthiest country in the world, which is exactly why I want to take a look at this video, where it is going to explain exactly what Norway is doing to become the world's richest country. I'm very, very interested what Norway is doing so well exactly. So, with that being said, let's take a look.
In terms of people, Norway is a pretty small country, home to only about 5.5 million individuals.
To
put that into perspective, Norway has fewer people than many of the world's city-states do, such as Singapore's 6 million people or Hong Kong's nearly 7.5 million people. But while small...
Yeah, like the whole country of Norway is like the size of some of American cities, actually. And yet, Norway is doing better, wealthier per person, actually, doing better in terms of wealth. So that's pretty amazing.
Small in people, Norway is very large in land. The country has about 385,000 square kilometers worth of overall land, roughly 140 times larger in geographic area than Hong Kong and roughly 464 times larger than Singapore, despite having a fewer number of people than in either. Put another way, Norway's geographic size is also roughly equivalent to Japan's.
Oh, wow. I've never thought about... I have a hard time judging the size of Norway. And I think Norway as a country is actually a bit bigger than I imagined.
And both countries have a similar amount of mountains that cover them. And yet, Japan has 22 times more people living within its similar mountainous area than Norway. Naturally, this makes Norway one of the most sparsely populated and overall empty countries in the world.
Right. Norway, the country, is big. The Norwegian population is very small. So there's just tons of empty land, like very sparsely populated, very spread out population, I imagine.
With the lowest density of people that can be found anywhere in mainland continental Europe, with the northern half of the country stretching beyond the Arctic Circle in the far north with a very thin layer of topsoil above bedrock. The land of Norway is mostly harsh, mountainous, rugged, and very cold with a short growing season. An environment that doesn't lend itself very well to sustaining large numbers of people.
Oh, so funny enough, Norway as a country is beautiful, big, amazing geography, so beautiful, but it's not the easiest land to live on, actually, or grow things, I think.
Only 2.2% of Norway's land is even considered arable and suitable for agriculture.
What? 2.2% of Norway is suitable for agriculture? 2% of all of Norway can grow crops and farms and stuff? I had no idea it was that low. So how does, this is all setting it up, I think, to answer the question, how does Norway have so much wealth? I've heard about the oil. Is it the oil or the salmon or what is it exactly?
one of the lowest percentages in the world and roughly equivalent to Yemen's percentage. A mountainous country in the Arabian desert without even any rivers that's widely regarded as a failed state. This ultimately means that despite having 385,000 square kilometers of overall land, only about 7,124 square kilometers of Norway's land is suitable for agriculture.
Wow. So Norway is not making money by growing crops and selling agricultural goods or anything. That's not what Norway's doing. It's doing other things.
A paltry amount that is similar to the amount of arable land found in El Salvador, a country that is 16 times smaller than Norway in overall land, but which has a similar population of about 6.3 million people. Because the two countries have a similar amount of arable land that they can actually use to sustain their populations with. And then, to make matters even worse for Norway, their small amounts of arable land are scattered all throughout the south of the country in small valleys in between all of their massive mountains, which has always made the creation of large, integrated, and efficient farms in the country impossible. With its vast and wide open expanses of arable land all throughout the country, the average farm size in the United States is more than 8 times greater than that in Norway as a result.
Wow, there you go. Farms here in America are 8 times bigger than Norway. Man, Norwegians must import a lot of their goods for like eating and stuff. Except for the fish and maybe like animals, meats and cattle. That can all be done, right? This is it. I never knew this about Norway, really.
And so, American farms are more integrated, more efficient, and more productive as a result, and can simply feed many times more people. Because of these inherent disadvantages when it comes to agricultural potential, there have been expectations and assumptions made by people all throughout Norway's history that the country should naturally be poor. Or at least, that Norway was historically a poor country until the sudden discovery of oil changed everything in the late 1960s.
There we go. Okay, finally, we are there. So Norway... that's exactly right. Norway should be poor. Norway can't grow anything, and yet that is not the case. And it all changed with the discovery of oil in Norway. But that explains how Norway got some wealth to begin with. How is Norway climbing up the ranks of the world ladder and becoming the #1 wealthiest country in the world? How is that happening now?
And paved the way for Norway's currently well-known prosperity. But the interesting truth is that oil didn't actually make Norway rich. It just made Norway even richer than it already was beforehand.
What?
Contrary to popular belief, Norway has been a relatively wealthy country for most of its entire history.
What? Wait, what? What? Huh? What? I didn't know about this. What? Huh? No one told me about this. I thought it was the oil. I thought Norway was wealthy because of the oil. Norway was already kind of rich before discovering oil? How? What?
And it almost counterintuitively has to do exactly with the same geography that makes the country so terrible for agricultural production. There are other geographic factors that can determine the fate of nations beyond agricultural potential. And one of the biggest others is how easy it is to travel around the country's territory and conduct trade. Transportation across Norway by land, however, has always been very difficult. For thousands of years before modern highways and tunnels, traveling along the Norwegian west coast on foot or horse was basically impossible because of the omnipresent steep mountains and deep fjords that carved all across the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, this is so correct. Like, when you think about it, Norway is a really, really challenging place to live, especially back in the old days. Like, before technology, Norway is really hard geographically to travel through. It's impressive, actually. That's why I think Norway does have a lot of like ferries and tunnels and stuff like that, right?
But this seemingly geographic curse actually turned into one of Norway's greatest geographic blessings in disguise. Because of all the jagged fjords located all throughout the Norwegian coast, Norway is generally regarded as having by far the longest coastline anywhere in Europe, with a coastline that's more than 6.5 times longer than the United Kingdom, according to the CIA World Factbook.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because of all the fjords and valleys, Norway's coast, the Norwegian land touching water, is really, really, really big, huh? But what does that mean for making money? I want to hear about the money.
In fact, Norway's coastline is considered to be so enormous because of all these fjords that it's ranked as having the second longest coastline of all the countries in the entire world,
What?
remaining only behind the #1 spot of Canada. This has always meant that as
Norway has the second biggest coast in the whole world?
remaining only behind the #1 spot of Canada.
Only behind Canada. I did not know that. That is really, like, you wouldn't think that just looking at Norway. Wow.
This has always meant that as Norway coalesced into a modern nation-state, its small population was always scattered in small clusters all throughout the mountains and the fjords, separated from one another across land.
Okay.
Not too unlike other mountainous societies like Afghanistan or Persia. But unlike those societies deep within the interior of Eurasia, the small scattered population clusters across Norway all had easy and immediate access to the global ocean because of all of the fjords that cut deep into Norway's interior. This geography encouraged a maritime culture to develop within Norway from very early on, and the fjords granted the Norwegians the ability to rapidly travel between each other's settlements by sea.
Oh, so Norwegian settlements, towns and cities, Norwegians have settled all along like the coast of Norway and are very scattered like along the coast, but it's easy to travel to different parts of Norway if you go along the coast, especially back like in the early days in history, using boats and stuff. That made it easier to travel by boat, since it would be difficult to travel by land with all the valleys and fjords and mountains. And that is so interesting. What a man. I have never thought about Norway like that. This is really interesting stuff, actually.
Moreover, the fjords enabled easy access for traders to penetrate deep into the country's interior and get close to one of Norway's greatest natural assets, its huge forests and lumber resources. Norway has never had the largest forests in Europe. It's beaten out by many other countries with larger ones like Russia, Finland, Sweden, and even France. But for centuries, all throughout the age of sail, before the development of railroads unlocked Russia's lumber potential, Norway's lumber industry was the biggest in Europe because of how much more relatively easier it was to access their forests in the interior.
What? I had no idea about this. Like, I really thought Norway was wealthy just because of oil, discovering oil. This is a really interesting, video, actually. Really interesting details. So Norwegians were able to travel around Norway by water. That actually made it easier to travel. It's the opposite of what I thought. I thought that'd make it harder. It made it easier to travel around Norway by boat, and Norwegians could access their forests. And they were like the biggest lumber industry for a long time. It was in Norway, selling lumber. I had no idea.
Through the fjords and export it to markets. Norway's lumber could be felled within the interior, then cheaply and efficiently dumped into rivers and floated downstream toward the settlements and sawmills along the fjords, where sawmills powered by those same downhill rivers and their waterfalls would refine the lumber, and the lumber could then be cheaply exported out through the fjords and onto the global market.
Oh my god, the fjords and the rivers of Norway are Norway's biggest asset. It let them harvest wood and lumber, and it also powered the sawmills and the lumber factories as well, and they were like floating trees and logs down the rivers and fjords. That's awesome. This is so cool. This is a whole part of Norwegian history I had no idea about.
And so, until the later 19th century, when railroads fully unlocked the lumber potential of European countries with larger forests like Russia, Finland, and Sweden, these relative geographic advantages made Norway the lumber powerhouse of Europe for centuries.
Norway was the lumber powerhouse of Europe. Who knew? Wow, well, Norwegians probably know, but I didn't know. Those darn railroads ruined everything. So Norway was already rich because of its massive lumber industry in Europe. That's fascinating. Wow.
and the country's maritime culture enabled it to build out a world-class merchant fleet.
Huh.
By the time that the 20th century rolled around, Norway already had the fourth largest merchant marine fleet in the entire world.
Wow.
The nature of Norway's well-connected but spread out and low-density population also encouraged two things. One, the communities were all connected to each other by the fjords and by the sea, which
Right.
led to a common identity emerging between all of them despite their mountainous geography.
Right.
And two, Norway's small population clusters learned early on to cooperate together on shipbuilding and construction for all of their common benefit.
Wow, all of Norway, like, grouped together to understand that Norway had a special characteristic, special ability to travel by water through all around Norway and to other countries, and that is awesome. That makes so much sense.
Entire Norwegian towns would cooperate together on the construction of ships that were vital for all of their survival, and shares in the ship's ownership would be divided amongst nearly everyone in the town who participated, from the lumberjacks to the craftsmen. Over time, this resulted in a much more spread out and decentralized distribution of wealth and ownership in Norway, in
Okay.
addition to the spread out and decentralized population.
Okay.
So, a large, centralized, and powerful class of capitalists never really developed in the country the same way that they did elsewhere in places like France and Britain, with their populations and economies both largely concentrated around their political capitals.
Oh, that's fascinating. This is so freaking interesting. What the heck? Norway, at least in this day, the wealth was really distributed throughout Norway because all of Norway was working together on this lumber industry. So the wealth was really evenly distributed, whereas in other countries, the wealth is usually really centralized in small pockets of the country.
Norway's geography, conversely, forced its people to trust each other and to cooperate on building the ships that were vital to their survival. And
Well, I wonder if all of this helped shape Norwegian culture to be what it is today, where Norwegians are very trusting with each other. The Norwegian society has a very high trust and a lot of cooperation and low crime. I think that might all stem from this history of Norway, where Norwegians had to work together, starting all the way back here in this day, in order to survive and to make money. That'll get you working together, make a little money.
so, early shipbuilding in Norway was largely cooperative in nature, and then that influenced the country's economy for centuries afterwards through to the present day, as Norwegian agriculture, forestry, maritime insurance, and fishing all became dominated by cooperatives.
There's the fishing and the boating. But it all started with lumber, with wood, in Norway. I had no idea. That's where it started. Okay.
While the Norwegian banking sector throughout the 19th and 20th centuries became effectively dominated by cooperative credit unions as well. Across the 19th century then, when Norway was widely believed to be a fairly poor region, Norway was actually already doing very well for itself in relative terms.
Yeah.
By the 1850s, Norway's GDP per capita was already higher than basically the entirety of Eastern Europe, exceeding that of Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. And
This was all the way back in the 1800s. Norway was already doing really, really well compared to other European countries per capita, per person, as far as wealth per person.
And by the 1880s, Norway's GDP per capita had eclipsed virtually all of southern Europe, too, including Portugal, Spain, and Greece, while by the turn of the 20th century in 1900, it had even surpassed that of Italy. And
Okay.
then by 1938, on the eve of the Second World War, decades before the discovery of oil in the country, Norway's GDP per capita had already exceeded those of Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, and by some estimates, it was already the wealthiest country on average in Europe.
Wow. Norway has been wealthy for a long time. I didn't know this. It was already beating most of Europe by 1938. This is so interesting, and we're not even caught up to the present day yet. Apparently, we're going to learn about why Norway is becoming the world's richest country now. And Norway is already doing really, really good back in 1938. This is amazing. But I think I'm gonna stop here for now. This is actually a very long video here that we've started watching. So I'm gonna have to cut this up into a couple of parts to be able to watch the full story here. But if you've enjoyed this so far, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on Norwegian wealth and history and lumber and everything we're learning about here. That'd be really amazing to hear about. And if you're interested in part 2 of this, or just more videos like this in general, me reacting to Norway and Norwegian culture and learning about Norway for the first time, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching and see you next time.